After the devastating flood, the water slowly begins to recede, and along with the destruction left behind by the disaster, long-buried secrets start rising to the surface. In a small town in the United Kingdom, heavy rains trigger severe flooding. The police are forced to respond quickly in order to help residents trapped in dangerous conditions. One patrol unit heads out to the affected area but gets into a minor car accident along the way. Officers Joe Marshall and Deepa Das are forced to continue on foot toward an underground passage, where several people are reportedly trapped and unable to escape the rising water. On the way there, Joe notices a woman who has also been in a car accident. Her vehicle is stuck, and although she managed to crawl out, her small child is still inside. Joe is pregnant, and the situation immediately strikes a nerve. Without hesitation, she decides to help, despite the risk of being swept away by the powerful current. She rushes toward the vehicle, but the mother manages to pull the baby out first by removing the child's car seat. Unfortunately, this only makes things worse. The strong current knocks the woman off her feet, and she loses her grip on the seat. The baby is instantly carried away by the rushing water, and Joe cannot catch up. At that very moment, an unknown man jumps into the water to save the child. Trying to assist him, Joe quickly runs across a nearby bridge and waits near a set of steps leading down the slope. When the man finally resurfaces, he manages to place the baby safely into the police officer's arms. But before he can reach safety himself, the powerful current drags him away. Some time later, Joe receives a call from Pat, her husband, who works as a detective. He begs her not to put herself in danger, but she ignores the risks. Her father was an outstanding detective, and she wants to follow in his footsteps no matter the cost. At the moment, she is finishing her service as a regular police officer and plans to enroll in detective training soon. Determined to prove herself, she continues helping residents in every way she can. Soon, she arrives at a gathering point where dozens of rescued residents have been brought to safety. She urges them to evacuate to a nearby elementary school that was not affected by the flooding. Afterward, she heads to one of the hardest hit neighborhoods, where many homes are partially underwater. Nearly all the families have already evacuated except for one elderly couple. They have generators and an independent drainage system, so they insist on staying in their house. By evening, all the evacuated residents are taken to the elementary school. Among the volunteers helping them is Molly, Joe's mother. She openly criticizes the actions of local politicians, particularly Sarah, but despite her frustration she is willing to help anyone in need. Joe also arrives at the school to assist people, but she quickly clashes with Kelly, her husband's sister. The two women have never gotten along. Unfortunately, Kelly's house was flooded, so she, her husband, and their daughter will have to stay with Joe and Pat for a while. When Joe returns home later, she is overwhelmed with anger, frustration, and resentment. Kelly's family behaves terribly. They leave a mess everywhere, take other people's belongings and food without asking, act rudely, and completely ignore her requests. The only person who truly cares about her is Pat, who brings her some snacks so she can at least eat a little before going to bed. The next morning, Joe and her partner once again patrol the flooded streets. Hearing strange noises, Joe returns to the house of the elderly couple and realizes their generator has stopped working. The officers manage to break down the door, only to discover the bodies of the old man and his wife. Their generator had malfunctioned after the basement flooded, and the couple died from the exhaust fumes without ever making it outside. Later, Joe is called to the underground parking garage of a new apartment complex. Another body has been discovered inside an elevator. The victim is a man about 35 years old, with no identification and no distinguishing features. It appears that he was heading downstairs when the flooding began and became trapped. Inside the elevator, he was essentially stuck in a giant aquarium and drowned before help could arrive. He has no phone and no documents, leaving the police with no way to identify him. The following day, the medical examiner performs an autopsy and reveals something shocking. The man did not die in the elevator at all. In fact, he died 2 days earlier, and the real cause of death was a severe head injury. After finishing her final day on duty, Joe begins her internship to become a detective, just like her late father. Soon, however, her secret comes to light. Joe claimed that she was only 6 months pregnant, but in reality she is due to give birth in just a few weeks. The lie was intentional. She wanted to complete her internship before maternity leave so that she could return to work as a detective instead of a regular officer. Still obsessed with the mysterious man found in the elevator, Joe secretly downloads the case files from a detective's computer. Wanting to avoid Kelly, she temporarily moves in with her mother, giving herself time to investigate the case on her own. She soon becomes convinced that the man was murdered and that his body was deliberately placed in the elevator. The first step is to identify the victim, but that requires a DNA analysis. A search through official databases produces no results. However, the largest DNA sample collections exist on genealogy websites that help people find relatives across different cities and countries. Using that data is illegal, but Joe decides to take the risk anyway. The next morning, she receives a response. There is one match. The victim apparently had a sister named Tasha Eden, who lives in France. When Joe calls her to inform her about the death of her brother a few days earlier, Tasha says something completely unexpected. Her brother died 5 years ago in a motorcycle accident. While secretly investigating the murder of the man found in the elevator, hiding the truth from her husband and the rest of the police, Jo tries to stay under the radar. She ignores Tasha's calls and refuses to answer, because Pat is nearby and might start suspecting something. Tasha is clearly frightened and deeply shocked, so she leaves several voice messages. In some, she demands the truth. In others, she openly threatens the person who might be lying to her. A little later, Jo and her mother head out to the streets that were recently flooded. The water has finally returned to the riverbed, and residents now have to clean up the mess, throwing away appliances and equipment ruined by the flood. Around the same time, Jack Radcliffe, a businessman and construction developer, arrives at the scene. He offers to donate a small amount of money to the residents as a form of moral compensation. When Jo's phone battery dies, she decides to head back to her mother's house. On the way, she meets a woman with a child and promises to find the man who saved them so they can thank him personally. Back at home, Jo discovers that the police have already published the first official report about the man found in the elevator. Using the police sketch and the information provided by Tasha, Jo manages to find the young woman's personal social media page. In old videos, Tasha is joking around with her brother Daniel, whose face perfectly matches the body discovered in the elevator. The case begins to take an even more unexpected turn. It appears that Daniel staged his own death 5 years ago. After that, he continued living here under the radar until someone killed him a few years later and placed his body in the elevator. That night, Tasha arrives from France to personally figure out what is really going on and to understand whether Jo is lying to her, or if the body recently found truly belongs to her brother. Meanwhile, Molly begins collecting signatures so she can run in the upcoming elections and become a local official. At the same time, Jo continues her independent investigation. On a sergeant's desk, she finds a list of potential names connected to the case, but Daniel Eden is not among them. While reviewing photos from the crime scene, Jo notices another strange detail. In the parking lot there were 4 cars, but in the photographs there are only 3. A red Toyota has disappeared from the underground parking garage. Most likely, this is not a coincidence but another clue in a much more complicated case than it first appeared. Some time later, Jo returns to the building where the man's body was discovered in the underground parking garage. There she meets the caretaker, Chris, who kindly shows her around the property. The building has not yet been officially opened, and there is trash and construction debris everywhere. However, one of the rooms is mysteriously locked. This raises suspicion, but they are unable to open it. Chris promises to call her as soon as he manages to deal with the problem. Jo also asks about the missing car, but Chris cannot help. The surveillance cameras have not yet been connected, which means there is no way to track what happened in the past few days, and certainly no way to trace the red Toyota. When Jo returns home, another unpleasant surprise is waiting for her. Trying to reconcile after a series of conflicts, Kelly and her husband have bought a massage chair. Instead of making things better, it only upsets Jo, because Pat's sister threw away the old chair that belonged to Jo's late father. Not wanting to deal with Pat's annoying relatives, Jo decides to leave for her mother's house once again. But at the doorstep she is confronted by Tasha, who demands answers. Hiding all of this from her husband, Jo asks Tasha to wait outside and drives her far away from the house. Tasha has brought the ashes of her supposedly deceased brother with her and demands an explanation. Since Jo is conducting the investigation unofficially, Daniel's sister decides to go to the police station. She does not mention her meeting with Jo, but she asks the officers to take a blood sample for a DNA test to determine whether the dead man was really her brother. A little later, Jo spots the man who saved the little girl from the floodwaters. Following him, she learns that the local hero's name is Lee. Jo is genuinely relieved that he survived and managed to escape from the water. She then suggests that he visit the mother of the rescued girl so she can thank him personally. That evening, Tasha goes to see Molly in order to speak with her daughter. The detectives treat her with hostility, and Tasha realizes that Jo is the only person who truly wants to help solve the case. She agrees to keep their cooperation a secret if it means finding out who killed Daniel and why. The next morning, Jo meets Finn, the grandson of the elderly couple who died during the disaster. The young man is convinced that what happened was not an accident, but the result of negligence by local businessmen and authorities. He wants those responsible to be held accountable. Finn promises to start his own investigation to understand why a district of the city that floods so regularly still has no adequate protection against the destructive force of the water. A little later, Jo meets with Tasha again and comes to an important realization. Daniel must have been using a different name, because almost no one here knows him by his real identity. While checking the list of potential names, Tasha notices a man named Alex, who owns a company called Nanta. She explains that she and her brother used to joke around, calling each other Nanta and Danta, even getting matching tattoos on their hands. This becomes an important lead. So Tasha and Jo head to the office of the company Nanta, where they unexpectedly run into Lee. As it turns out, Lee is the best friend of Tasha and Daniel. He and Daniel worked together for some time and eventually founded this company. However, about a week ago, Tasha's brother suddenly disappeared without a trace. Lee came to the office hoping to find his friend or at least some clue about where he might have gone, but his search led nowhere. During the conversation, Lee admits that he had no idea about the name change or about Daniel staging his own death. They would like to continue the conversation, but Pat suddenly arrives at the scene. Afraid of running into her husband, Jo quickly leaves the office, begging Lee and Tasha to leave as well. Meanwhile, Molly meets with Jack at his company and learns about his plan to build a protective wall along the river to shield the town from future floods. The idea sounds promising and even inspiring at first. However, a meeting with Sarah quickly turns into a disappointment. Local authorities are ignoring the potential danger and refuse to approve the construction project. The officials are not even alarmed by the possibility of human casualties. According to them, any construction must pass through approvals and endless bureaucratic procedures. Realizing how ineffective the system truly is, Molly promises herself that she will do everything possible to become a public official and change the situation. A little later, the building caretaker Chris calls Jo and tells her that he managed to break open the locked room. What he discovered inside shocked him so much that he urgently asks her to come immediately. Unfortunately, Jo is forced to delay her visit because the head of the local police department officially assigns her to the investigation. Since she grew up in this town and knows it better than anyone else, the department believes she could be useful. Determined to justify their trust as quickly as possible, Jo repeats the work she had already secretly done earlier. She shows the detectives the video from Tasha's social media page and reveals that the body currently in the morgue belongs to Daniel Eden. However, the detectives do not allow Jo to get involved in more serious parts of the investigation, forcing her to lie in order to continue her work. Pretending that they need to visit a telephone company, Jo brings along her former partner and heads out to meet Chris. When they arrive, they discover that the caretaker has mysteriously disappeared. Still, that does not stop them from checking the room that had previously been locked. Now the room is open, but Jo immediately notices something strange. The place is far too clean. This is clearly not a coincidence but an attempt to cover up evidence. Someone has carefully cleaned the room, removing whatever had shocked Chris earlier when he called her. Jo cannot stop thinking about the missing red car and about how the body ended up in the elevator in the first place. After inspecting the elevator, she realizes that someone must have dropped it down deliberately and then escaped the trap. But doing something like that would require considerable physical strength. At the same time, Lee takes Tasha to a remote farm where Daniel had been living recently. Inside, she finds many of her brother's belongings and becomes overwhelmed with memories. Yet she still cannot understand why Daniel felt the need to fake his death. At one point, someone knocks on the door, and Lee goes outside. Watching through the window, Tasha witnesses a tense argument between Lee and Jack. Meanwhile, on her way to meet them, Jo notices a red car and begins to suspect that it might be the same missing Toyota. She follows it, but the chase leads nowhere. The vehicle actually belongs to a family heading to a children's party, and they clearly have nothing to do with the events unfolding in the case. While checking Lee's background, Jo discovers that he has been brought to the police several times in the past for disorderly conduct and fighting. This does not make him the prime suspect, but it certainly does not fit the image of a flawless local hero either. Still struggling with family conflicts and constant arguments with Pat, Jo begins avoiding life at home more and more often, spending increasing amounts of time at her mother's house. At the same time, Molly becomes a more active and public figure in the community. Finn suggests that she start looking for those responsible for the floods and begin gathering evidence. To do that, they travel to a new residential district built by Jack. While searching for possible clues, Molly unexpectedly sees Jack together with Sarah and quickly realizes something shocking. The city's most powerful businessman and the local official are lovers. She sincerely feels sorry for Sergeant McKee, because Sarah is his wife, and he has no idea about her betrayal. While Tasha goes to the morgue to identify her brother's body, Jo meets with Lee to speak with him face to face. Lee finally admits that he knew about the name change and about Daniel staging his death, but he never understood the reason behind it. Daniel had a criminal past, and adopting a new identity was his attempt to become a legitimate businessman and leave his dark past behind. Why he lied to Tasha remains a mystery, but that is not the most important issue right now. Recently, their company received a Major project. However, not only has Daniel disappeared, but £100,000 sterling are also missing, and Lee has no idea where the money went. Soon Tasha returns from the morgue, and Lee decides to support her during this difficult moment. Meanwhile, Jo decides to find Chris and speak with him directly, so she goes to his home. The man does not answer the door, but through the window Jo notices him lying inside, completely motionless. She breaks into the house and quickly realizes the terrible truth. Chris is already dead. Soon after, police officers arrive at the scene and begin questioning Jo as a potential witness. Afraid to reveal the truth about her secret investigation, she lies and claims that she came here on an errand for Kelly. But at some point, Jo realizes that her lie has gone too far. When she returns home, Jo finally tells Pat everything and asks for his help. Her husband does not want her to destroy a detective career that has barely even begun. To protect her, he deletes Chris's voice message and asks Jo to stop the secret investigation immediately. At the same time, he promises to speak with Kelly so she can provide Jo with a solid alibi. Meanwhile, Tasha begins to suspect that Lee is not telling her the whole truth. However, her friend clearly has no intention of being completely honest with her. Later, while trying to fall asleep in her brother's bed, Tasha discovers a small box with a hidden compartment inside. In that secret space, she finds a key. The next morning, Joe arrives at the police station and attends a meeting about the recent murder. The lead detective and his entire team are convinced that Tasha is hiding something and might somehow be involved. Technically, this seems impossible because she was not even in the country at the time. However, the detectives also know that Tasha, the late Daniel, and their father have all spent time in prison for various minor crimes, including financial fraud schemes. At the same time, Tasha goes to meet Jack. She is convinced that the businessman killed her brother to resolve a land dispute. Jack, however, strongly denies the accusation. He explains that the business connected to the land was not handled by Daniel alone. There was also another mysterious figure involved, a man named William Kane. Failing to get a confession, Tasha returns to her hotel, where police officers are already waiting for her. They take her to the station for questioning. During the interrogation, the detective reveals that Daniel traveled to France 3 weeks ago and was seen near their family home. Based on several circumstantial clues, Tasha could potentially be connected to everything that is happening, and the detective openly suspects her involvement. The accusation outrages her. Tasha insists that she wants the truth and intends to find her brother's killer, regardless of whether anyone believes her. Meanwhile, Joe becomes convinced that Chris's death was not suicide, but murder. While analyzing surveillance footage, she notices that someone was near Chris's house shortly before his death. The video quality is poor and does not prove anything, but Kelly mentions that Chris had conflicts with Jack. In theory, the businessman might have killed the caretaker because Chris knew too much and had seen something inside the locked room that he was never supposed to see. Joe shows the footage to Pat and asks him to help investigate. But once again, her husband refuses to take the evidence seriously. He simply wants to protect his wife from danger. Eventually, this leads to a heated argument between them, as neither of them is willing to understand the other. After the interrogation, Tasha goes to a storage warehouse using the key she found earlier. Inside, she discovers many of her brother's belongings, various documents, and a large amount of money that is believed to be stolen. Among the papers, she finds the name William Kane and realizes that this man clearly knows far more than she does. Tasha tells Joe everything she has found, but many details still remain unclear. At the same time, Molly and Finn continue their own independent investigation. They discover that Jack and Sarah have been manipulating construction projects while breaking numerous laws and regulations. They promised to build proper storm drainage and water management systems, but in reality they ignored those responsibilities completely. By cutting costs on construction, they are destroying the city's ecological balance, which is exactly what leads to these devastating floods. If nothing changes, the entire city could eventually end up underwater. The most suspicious detail is that Jack recently sold an important plot of land to the company Nanta, yet he still continued to control the property behind the scenes. It becomes clear that Daniel, Lee, and Jack were closely connected in this entire scheme. However, one key figure still remains unknown to everyone involved, and that person is William Kane. A little later, Molly attends a public meeting meant to determine the timeline and budget for future construction projects. The authorities, represented by Sarah, propose offering financial assistance to Jack, but they are hiding many important details. After secretly overhearing a conversation between the lovers, Molly realizes that they are motivated only by profit. They are manipulating laws and regulations purely to make money. During the meeting, Molly publicly exposes Sarah and Jack, accusing them of corruption. However, instead of investigating her claims, the officials throw Molly out of the meeting hall. The entire confrontation is broadcast live, and Sergeant McKee watches it on television. In that moment, he learns the truth about his wife's betrayal. On her way home, Molly is deliberately struck by an unknown driver in a black SUV. At the same time, Joe goes to a location marked by coordinates that Tasha sent her earlier. There, she finds shipping containers filled with stolen construction equipment belonging to Jack. While she is investigating the site, Lee suddenly appears. At first, he seems ready to attack her with a knife, but at the last moment he hides the weapon. Deciding to be more honest, Lee finally tells her the truth. He admits that he and Daniel were indeed working with Jack. The businessman promised to pay double the value for the land, but eventually he found himself on the verge of bankruptcy. Desperate to receive an insurance payout, Jack ordered Daniel and Lee to steal construction equipment and sell it in another country. Lee successfully stole the equipment, but Daniel never managed to find a buyer. Shortly afterward, he disappeared. Now Lee begs Joe to give him time to sell the equipment so he can avoid complete financial ruin. For Joe, one thing is becoming clear. Jack was standing on the edge of bankruptcy and might have been willing to do anything to prevent losing everything. He could have killed Daniel, and possibly Chris as well, just to protect his secret and save his business. And yet, despite everything they have uncovered, William Kane still remains a mysterious figure. A man who may know far more about this entire story than anyone else. After the confession, Lee drives Joe home, unaware that Kelly's husband saw them together. He immediately reports it to Pat, which sparks a serious argument between the couple. However, they are soon forced to put their conflict aside when they receive shocking news. Molly has been hit by a car and rushed to the hospital. Fortunately, she survives and avoids severe injuries, but due to a head trauma she cannot remember some of the recent events. Joe suspects this was not an accident but an attempted murder, possibly orchestrated by either Jack or Sarah. The following morning only deepens these suspicions. Jack is seen riding in a taxi instead of driving his usual black SUV. Pat receives this information and decides to inspect the businessman's vehicle, but the car shows no signs of damage. At the same time, Jack visits Molly in the hospital to show sympathy and concern. While secretly listening to their conversation, Jo discovers a devastating truth. Her mother had been cheating on her late husband with Jack for years. Disappointed and shaken, Jo leaves her mother's house and meets with Tasha to investigate an address where William Kane might be hiding. Traveling far outside the city, Tasha and Jo wait for a possible suspect or accomplice to appear. Instead, they encounter a blind woman named Emma. What they learn next is shocking. Emma is actually Daniel's wife. In the past, Daniel had been involved in crime, but later he decided to turn his life around and start fresh under a new name. He deliberately cut ties with his sister because she was reckless and constantly attracted trouble. Lee helped him with this transformation by encouraging him to run a legitimate business. For a long time it seemed that Daniel had truly changed, but recently his life began to fall apart again. Planning to escape, Daniel withdrew money from his account and hid it so he could leave the city with Emma. As for the mysterious William Kane, it turns out to be nothing more than a pseudonym Daniel gave to his 2-year-old son and only heir. But the most shocking revelation for Tasha and Jo is this: the only person Emma suspects of murdering Daniel is Lee. Meanwhile, Jack meets with Sarah to discuss construction plans and ways to protect the city from future flooding. He urgently needs funds to buy sand and other materials, but the local authorities are unable to help. Jack is on the brink of financial collapse, which is why he demands that his car be sold immediately. While dealing with this issue, Kelly witnesses something alarming. Her husband is suddenly arrested and taken away in an unknown direction. She quickly informs Jo and Pat, asking them to help free her husband, who works for a transportation company. At that moment, Jo begins to realize that her husband and Lee are somehow connected. After all, Lee had planned to sell containers and could not have done it without accomplices. Later, Emma tells Tasha that Daniel once traveled to France to see her and invite her to escape with them. Realizing that her brother truly loved her, Tasha reveals the money she found. But suddenly the police arrive at the scene to arrest Tasha and take her to the station for another interrogation. Before leaving, Tasha calls Jo, suspecting that she was the one who tipped off the police. Jo denies everything, but at that moment she hears a phone ringing in her husband's pocket. When she discovers an unregistered phone, Jo checks the messages and realizes they were sent by Lee. Now everything becomes clear. Pat and Lee know each other, and more than that, they are somehow connected to the ongoing series of crimes. During the interrogation, Tasha tells the police about the strange containers located on a farm outside the city and suggests they investigate. When the police arrive at the farm, Lee puts up armed resistance and manages to escape. At the same location, Deepa discovers a red car, the very same one that had been the fourth vehicle in the underground parking lot. Trying to find her husband, Jo goes to the place where Pat once proposed to her. When they finally meet, Jo confronts him, realizing that he intentionally revealed Tasha's location. His goal was to have Tasha arrested so she would testify against Jo, who had broken the law while searching for the truth. Pat was even willing to let his own wife go to prison. But for Jo, one question matters more than anything else. Why would he do something like that? Pat truly loves Jo, and because of that, he finally decides to tell her the truth. The real person behind everything happening in the city is Jack, who has been pushed to the edge of bankruptcy. But his main accomplice was not Sarah, as many believed. It was Mackie, her husband. The police sergeant had essentially been supporting the businessman and his operations. Not only did he cover up Jack's crimes, he also committed crimes himself to protect their shared financial interests. The locked office inside the building was actually their secret meeting place, where they gathered to discuss their plans. 2 days before the flood, Jack, Sarah, Daniel, Lee, Pat, and Mackie all met there. Jack proposed another risky scheme and asked Daniel to lend him £100,000. Daniel refused. However, Lee agreed to help, and the disagreement quickly escalated into a conflict between the men. During the confrontation, Daniel defended himself and wounded Jack, while also asking Mackie not to protect his wife's lover. The public humiliation enraged the sergeant. In a moment of fury, Mackie grabbed a wooden beam and struck Daniel in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Everyone in the room witnessed the murder, but no one dared to speak about it. They were all tied together by a massive financial scheme that could send every one of them to prison. Pat was horrified by what happened, but for many years he had been accepting bribes under Mackie's protection. Because of that, he simply could not bring himself to tell the truth to his wife. After learning the truth, Jo decides she can no longer stay with Pat as her husband or as the father of her child. She despises corrupt police officers and now looks at him with contempt. But Pat has one more terrifying confession to make. The biggest criminal and the most corrupt figure in the city was actually Jo's father. While working as a detective, he abused his position to rob people, imprison those who stood against him, and eliminate anyone who got in his way. Realizing that the world she believed in has completely collapsed in a single moment, Jo leaves to be alone and process everything she has just heard. Soon, another flood begins, and the city slowly starts sinking underwater. Amid the growing chaos, Pat loses contact with Jo and becomes increasingly anxious. Afraid she might do something reckless, he tells Mackie everything. In response, Mackie warns Lee to be more careful so he does not get arrested. The situation becomes even more dangerous when the sergeant reveals the address where William Kane might be hiding. Heading there with the intention of eliminating everyone involved, Lee instead finds Emma and Daniel's son. he cannot bring himself to shoot a child. Instead, he helps them evacuate and then sends Joe a message from Emma's phone, asking her to come immediately. Taking advantage of the moment, Lee meets with Mackie and receives new instructions. Instead of running away, he chooses to trust the sergeant. After all, Mackie and Sarah had once been Lee's foster parents and raised him. Meanwhile, Joe arrives at Emma's house and walks straight into Lee's trap. At first, Lee believes that she was the one who tipped off the police and wants to kill her, but soon he realizes she had nothing to do with it. Joe had already crossed the line herself by allowing stolen equipment to be sold in order to uncover the truth. Pat knew about everything as well, yet he was ready to send Joe to prison. The only remaining person who knew the address of the farm was Tasha, who had suspected Lee of murdering her brother. Fearing that his arrest could happen at any moment, Lee decides to flee. Unexpectedly, Joe goes with him. She tries to convince him to stop and think clearly, but during the heavy rain he loses control of the car, and they crash. Some time later, Lee regains consciousness and realizes that Joe is giving birth. Severely injured and understanding that he does not have much time left, Lee decides to reveal the entire truth. He had always felt indebted to Mackie, whom he considered a father figure. Because of that loyalty, Lee stayed silent about the murder of his friend and later hid Daniel's body inside the elevator. Not long after, he also killed Chris and staged it to look like a suicide attempt. Lee was not truly a bad person, but Mackie had manipulated and used him for years. After leaving the crashed car, Lee calls Tasha and gives her the coordinates of their location. Soon Tasha and Pat arrive at the scene. There they discover Joe, who has just given birth to a daughter, and Lee's body. He died from a severe head injury. Later, Joe, Tasha, and Pat go to the hospital. Molly soon arrives as well to see her newborn granddaughter. She promises that she will do everything in her power to put Jack behind bars. Now she finally has something to fight for and a reason to pursue a position as a city official. While discussing everything that happened in the hospital corridor, Joe and Pat find the strength to forgive each other. Their love, despite everything, proves stronger than the circumstances. At that moment, Mackie approaches them. He is directly connected to everything that has been happening in the city. Joe openly tells him that she knows about the murders of Daniel and Chris, as well as the financial crimes, but the sergeant is not afraid. He calmly explains that her testimony will change nothing. There is almost no evidence, and no one else will testify against him. And if anyone does decide to speak, Mackie already has enough evidence against everyone. Against Pat, who accepted bribes. Against Joe, who broke the law during her investigation. And even against her late father. He has the power to destroy them all. Even the businessman is not beyond his reach. In reality, Mackie is the one who holds true power in this city. Here, the one who is right is not the person who knows the truth. It is the person who pulls the strings and secretly controls everyone's lives from behind the scenes. Mackie believes himself untouchable and fears no punishment. But Joe is ready to go all the way to make sure the criminal finally faces justice. Determined to put Mackie behind bars, she heads to the police chief. And now the question remains, if laws are created by those who hold power, can they truly remain fair for those who have none? Or do laws slowly turn into tools that protect only the interests of the powerful? Share your thoughts in the comments down below. Hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.